President Joe Biden is preparing to spend big. His goal? To rescue Americans and the U.S. economy from the COVID-19 pandemic. The question remains, is he spending too much?
They cannot watch people lose their jobs, and we have to act. We have to act now.
The Biden administration's nearly $2 trillion rescue package would pump money into vaccine deployment, reopening schools, funding state and local governments, and of course putting money directly into the hands of Americans. It's a steep price tag, but Biden says the nation can't afford anything less.
I know what I just described does not come cheaply, but failure to do so will cost us dearly.
Economists agree getting out of the pandemic is the first step towards economic recovery. Where they don't agree begins from that point on. By some estimates, Biden has proposed close to $11 trillion in long-term spending plans, investing in healthcare, infrastructure, energy, and education over the next decade.
President Biden promises massive new spending, most of which, frankly, is the proper priority of state governments. So he wants to expand education spending and transportation spending. But that's why we have state governments. We don't need the federal government increasing spending on that.
Those are all spaces where we have lacked adequate investment for a long time. Not just 4 years, longer than that. You need to try to make up for the investments that have been neglected over time. Those are specific areas of spending that I do think it's important to do.
A third of that new spending would be courtesy of more than $3.5 trillion in new taxes, including reversing Trump's tax cuts for large corporations and high-earning families, along with some new taxes. Critics say the tax hikes would hurt the economy, including many smaller businesses, at a time when we can't afford it.
President Biden wants to raise taxes not to reduce the deficit, but to increase spending. So I think this would be a death spiral for the economy. Higher taxes would damage growth, and that would push debt ever higher compared to the size of the economy.
Chris Edwards, director of tax policy studies at the Cato Institute, predicts it would send big business back overseas.
Big corporations, they don't have to locate in America. If you're building electric cars or you're building semiconductors, you can locate your new factory anywhere. You don't have to invest in the United States. So by raising the corporate tax rate, you'll be driving those new factories and facilities overseas. And ultimately, that is bad for American workers.
Lawrence Kotlikoff, a professor of economics at Boston University, disagrees. He says there are incentives that can lure businesses to invest in the U.S.
That's called 100% expensing. You may also have heard of accelerated depreciation. These are ways to say, look, you, Caitlin, are investing in the U.S., you're going to have to pay a high tax rate. But on the other hand, we're going to give you some money up front.
Some economists also warn that Biden's tax increases will trickle down to the average American. If economic growth slows and businesses don't grow as quickly, the American worker won't make as much money and will end up with a lower standard of living. The almost $28 trillion national debt is another major concern. Austin Goolsbee, a former economic advisor to President Obama and current advisor to Biden, says raising taxes is how we begin to address our debt.
It's going to involve more revenue. It's going to involve tax rates going back to something like the historic rates and historic levels, not the depressed levels that we've seen the last three and a half years.
Critics say only a decrease in spending will make a difference.
The way to chip away at the federal government debt is simply to lower the growth rate in spending or freeze spending for a few years while the economy recovers. That way we can get this deficit on a downward path.
Biden's economic policies will have to make it through Congress. Budget bills, including tax bills, need 51 votes to pass in the Senate. So each Democrat will have to back any legislation that comes through, or it will need bipartisan support. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.